Now, you are looking right now and meeting the executive director of the Rogers Slater Foundation. The Rogers Slater Foundation is Philip, it is Carrie, it is Clayton, it is Steve, it is Louise, it is Luke, and it is Irene. All 7 of these individuals are overseeing it.
So I remember a couple different things happening. I remember, when it came times for tithes and offerings, like we would always, it seemed interesting to me that we would always put, it in a closed envelope rather than cash. There are a couple different times where my grandmother would put this gobs of cash in it, and that seemed a little bit different to me. Only afterwards did I find out that it had been from grandfather gambling. And the rule of the house was that it's fine if you gambled so long as it went to the church. I remember my grandfather and my mom always being part of something going on. Sometimes it would go over to my head as to what, but we were having these meetings, or they were having these meetings where they'd meet with different folks. I remember when the church was building a new building, my grandfather would show up with his hard hat on. I remember seeing or going to different fancier places and thinking all that was normal. It didn't really hit me till a later age that oh, well, this is a little different than what most people are going through. But I think one of the things my family's always done is to, while it is nice to have those big family gatherings, and I didn't really quite understand how much wealth is going into it, that wasn't really the most important aspect of getting together and everything. So it was one of those things where, despite the night gatherings, or the I don't want to say balls, but we went to
the balls, the galas,
yeah. But it didn't really quite hit home that why we were doing that until a little bit of a later age.
Sure.
And it's less vacation and stuff like that. Like I remember going to the Businessman Hall of Fame with my grandfather, and it finally kind of dawning on me, okay, well, he's being honored, but not just because of what he was doing, but all the people he's been able to interact with. And
let's talk about meaningful involvement and the fact that you're a big supporter of Camp Greer in Old Fort, North Carolina.
Started out in 2008 as just a summer camp counselor. Been through the Boy Scouts and all that, so I had some kind of exposure to the out of doors, but it wasn't really my thing. And it's there where I really found my community. More so than that, I found, as I said, the love of outdoors, but also being able to share that love of outdoors and being able to help people find that exact same experience or something similar through all the kids that are coming. So I'd say as far as me working there, I just fell in love with the place.
You first were a counselor.
Yep.
But then you moved into, matter of fact, you told me you can't stay for dinner because you've got something going on with worms.
Yeah, I got worms being delivered today.
So what are you doing at Camp Greer?
So now, a couple years ago, we decided to add an agriculture component to it because there's this disconnect between young people and where their food comes from and stewardship of the land and all of that. And that's something I've always identified with. In many ways, we have that disconnect, and it's something that I think is critical to one's well-being is understanding your place within the world, but also all the different things that go out and the interactions you have with the natural world. But beyond that, there's a spiritualness that comes about from being in that setting, whether you want it or not. You'll find it. We always kind of laugh about, and it's a bit corny, but there's no Wi-Fi in the woods, but if you listen long enough, you will find a connection. Almost every camper will come through the farm, and we've got a different wide range of people and their experience with that. Some of the kids have never seen any sort of food grown. I've never seen a chicken other than on the internet or on TV or something like that. And then you've got some campers that are a little bit more into it. Maybe they're coming from a more rural background.
Urban background?
Yeah, that's what I meant. Urban background. So we get quite a wide range of kids coming through that, but the end goal for each of them is the same, which is finding that connection to the natural world, and also how do we manage, how are we good stewards of it, how are we bad stewards of it, of the world that we're living in.
What are things that are important to you, and how does the decision-making process look?
Well, we look for charities that we can make a bigger splash with, and a more conservative amount of money towards those programs. So while we some of these bigger organizations, while they're certainly valuable and we certainly want to donate to them, it's something that being as big as they are, it's harder to become personally involved with them, or at least it seems that way. So we look for places that we can make real change or big splashes, but also something that we can dive into ourselves and see where our money's going to work.
I see what you're saying. Smaller organizations or mid-sized organizations versus the American Cancer Foundation, et cetera. Here's something interesting. I've never asked you this question. Have you ever had a proposal submitted to you that the family said, you want to know what, that's not a good fit? And what was the reason why that wasn't a good fit?
Well, I think first of all, we look at, the case for support and whether it vibes with us to a certain extent. But then, of course, after that, after you think that you've liked the organization that's making an offer, you then need to dive in and look at, okay, well, are they doing everything they're supposed to be doing? Or how is their fundraising going? All of those things. So, in many ways, it's a multifaceted process where we look at different aspects of the organization. But the biggest thing is that what kind of impact are they making on individuals' lives, and how are they doing that? And I would say another thing is we tend to look at ways in which our money can affect the program in the longer term. We try to stay away from going towards operating costs and more things like infrastructure and things like that, so that they can become more self-reliant in the future. The ones we ended up funding was called Real Champions. It's down in Beaufort County.
Irene.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So Irene Gillespie, one of our board members, was personally involved with the program, knew some of the people that were trying to bring it up and build it. And it vibed with us in many good ways. I mean, for one thing, we were seeing that this program is going to be helping underserved children that were in the cycle of poverty and ways in which to break them out of that. And we were really impressed not only with the intent of it, but also how organized they were, and some of the real statistics that they were able to show us. Now, Real Champions, I think, was an offshoot of something called Friends for the Children, which is a pretty successful program across the United States. They've been adding things left and right, different programs in different cities. But the biggest thing that they got across to us was that the main way to break the cycle of poverty was three things. One, you need to get your GED. Two, you needed to not get pregnant by the time you're 25 or older. And then the biggest factor was having a positive role model that was consistent through your upbringing and through becoming who you are as a person. So having that last factor of having someone positive as a positive role model, that's something that not everyone has the ability to to get. It's not something we're all blessed with. Having a program like that, know exactly what their target audience is going to be and trying to fix that by engaging the children early on, elementary school, and then being a positive role model throughout until they turn 18 and then sometimes even beyond. But that's another example of someone on our board finding a program that they really wanted to be a part of.
I asked the question, what happens when you have to start to give your family's wealth away? Now, again, this may be a bit personal, but you had a personal framework about what you believed about your family's wealth as it related to you. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Sort of, kind of, yeah. So, I mean, I think, in those early years when I'm starting to figure out, we are more well off than a lot of folks, there's always something important that the reason for that wealth is to impact your community and impact other folks. It's not to necessarily spend. I think I picked that up from that story of, a huge wad of cash going into the offering plate. Like, that's something where the money wasn't important necessarily to us as much as the impact that we could make with it.
I also remember in our conversation, you saying, my grandfather made this money. My mother helped him oversee it, but you didn't necessarily say, this is my money.
Right. Yeah. I never felt like, I still feel that way. I don't feel like I earned all this money. It's not my money to spend. It's money to, bring about change and good works to other folks. It was never something to be spent as like a personal some. It's also on the flip side of that, like it's quite humbling to be able to have that, I don't want to say power, but influence to be able to find projects that you really care deeply about and to try to influence them in some personal way, not just through finances, but through gifts and service as well.
Louise, let me ask you a question. I apologize for putting you on the spot.
I knew you were, Jimmy. You couldn't help yourself. Yes, sir.
Is that Steve's shoulder? Is that
Yes,
Steve?
that's Steve's shoulder.
Right, I'm here. I've been out here all the time.
There's Steve.
Good to see you, pal. Louise, just give me a little bit of background on why and at what point in Luke's life you decided to name him the head of the foundation after you had been the head for so many years.
It was a process. I can say that. At the very beginning, Luke was like reluctant, didn't really want to do it, sometimes didn't do it. We have an office of the family person who will not probably show herself, named Irene, who is part of the family. She's not just the administrative person. She's very much a part of the foundation, and she's helped a lot. And the more and more that Luke got involved in charity and growing up and beginning to figure out who he was, the more it became clear that he was going to be the heir apparent to the foundation leadership as well as to the family leadership.
I was listening earlier as Louise was talking about how everyone made decisions and how they had criteria. And then as Luke was talking about, investing and all of the conversations around seed investing versus existing. So it sounds like the family invests based on a criteria, which really you could map that to being an investment strategy. So is it that you tend to invest in others' interests that deliver back on your strategic objectives? Is that an informal way of looking at that? Or because I think that a lot of the things that people tend to not ask is the reason they don't ask questions is they don't know where to put context in, or they don't want to offend by saying something wrong. But it does sound like you guys have a very solid strategic framework or fabric within your family.
I think a lot of that was built around my generation starting to be more a part of the charitable giving. Louise and Daddy Bill kind of had that business background where they kind of already knew how to evaluate everything. And for us, we were just learning that. So in many ways, we asked them to develop a criteria so that we could start to learn, okay, this is what makes a good charity versus this is what makes a not so great charity. As far as the framework, it has been extremely useful to us. Just because we can look at something and like, okay, well, does this check off all of our boxes? And if it doesn't check off one of the boxes, why or how can we help them to check that box off?
For me, I'll tell you a quick story. I had a friend who was starting a nonprofit that was going to help young children with drug and alcohol addiction issues. And having been around Jimmy and been through the process very early on, before he even had NANOE, years ago, I said, "What's your case for support?" And he said he had been to a workshop on giving at Harvard. And he said, they didn't mention a case for support. I'm like, you got to have a case for support. What are you doing? Now he's knowledgeable, but he came to NANOE and learned a lot. So for me, knowing the basics of how to create a case, how to make a compelling case, making sure that your case is not the exact same case as 5 other people. That's important. If you're going to start a startup, have it really be something that's unique. My background is in sales, and I used to talk about what's your value proposition. And it's different for a nonprofit than for a for-profit, but you still have to have a value proposition. What is it that you're going to do? And Jimmy used to say, it's so simple. It was so profound. How are you going to change lives? If you don't know, nobody's going to invest. So it doesn't have to be. I have another friend that volunteers, and she just drives me crazy because I'll say, please, just send me a paragraph. Send me something. I know who you are. I love you. You're one of my best friends in the world. Put the paper on the paper. Put something on the paper. Send me a scribbly notepad, but send me something that has, here's your budget. Here's what you're trying to do. Here's the timeline. And here's what difference it's going to make. So don't feel like you have to have everything all totally cooked or ready. to go to a big donor. Sometimes it's going for a cup of coffee and sharing your heart.
Welcome to my world. I give you Louise, Luke, and Steve Slater.